guys, welcome to this video and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be going over my top 5 tips for getting into FPV. Before we get into things, if I could ask you guys to just click that like button down below, it helps me out a ton with the YouTube algorithm. So yeah, demolish it, obliterate it, whatever you want to do with it, just hit the like button. Unless you've already hit it before, because then you would unlike the video. Anyways, FPV is really fun, but also really hard to get into. For me, Cinematic FPV is the ultimate way to capture a location. Myself being a full-time travel filmmaker, I'm constantly looking for ways to just make places look more interesting, and Cinematic FPV is the best way that I've found to do that. From the super wide epic landscapes all the way down to the tiny little details, Cinematic FPV kind of covers all your bases. Adding FPV to my arsenal has led to a huge boost in clients and what I can charge those clients. On top of that, it is just like the most fun thing in the world. There's really nothing like it. But if you're watching this video, odds are you know how hard it is to get into. So I wanted to go ahead and just make this video just to kind of help out people who are just getting into it. And tip number 1 is to start in the simulator. So starting in the simulator is super important because what the simulator is basically like an online video game that connects to your actual FPV drone controller and simulates what it's like to fly in the real world. So what this does is it allows you to crash like a million drones and not actually crash a million drones. So you can get pretty good at it and get a ton of practice without actually spending a ton of money fixing up drones. And the simulators, while nothing can really imitate flying a real drone, they're pretty damn close. My top recommendations for simulators are LIFTOFF and FPV FREERIDER Unleashed. LIFTOFF is super fun because you can play with a bunch of different people like on online platforms, and then FPV FREERIDER Unleashed is just like really fun maps. There's like a forest, a desert, and a bunch of cool places you can fly and get the hang of. So when I was first getting into it, every chance I got, whether I was just hanging out or I was on a phone call or something, odds are I was on the simulator just playing. And all you need to get started is buying the simulator and then a cheap controller. As far as what controllers to use, I'm going to get a little bit more into that in the next one. Alright, so tip number 2 is to start out with a TINYWHOOP and go from there. A TINYWHOOP is essentially just a really small FPV drone that usually comes in a kit with goggles and a controller that you can basically just fly around the house. And since it's so small, you can pretty much crash it as many times as you want, and it really won't break down like the big 5 inches would. Like I said, these come with a controller and goggles. So the controller for the TINYWHOOP you can use in the simulator. So when you're first starting, if you just buy a TINYWHOOP kit, which I believe are around $130 or something, you have a little drone that you can eventually fly and a controller to plug up to the simulator. And then on top of that, once you move up to the TINYWHOOP, you'll be able to fly with the goggles and just kind of develop those skills of just immersing yourself in the goggles and flying in that way. My top recommendation for a TINYWHOOP setup is the Beta FPV TINYWHOOP. There'll be a link down in the description if you want to check it out. I think, like I said, it's about $130. Alright, tip number 3 is finally once you move from the TINYWHOOP to the actual cinematic drone that you're going to put a GoPro on and film with. My number 1 recommendation is just to go with the DJI setup if you can afford it. If you want to go a little bit cheaper, there's definitely some analog setups that you can use. I've made videos about them in the past. The one that I used was the Oblivion, but if you can afford it, just definitely go with DJI, mainly because of the simplicity of it. One of the biggest problems with FPV drones is that they're actually so hard to even get in the air when you're first starting. Whether it's binding receivers, setting things up in beta flight, it's just so confusing and frustrating in the beginning. It gets to the point where you're almost spending more time trying to figure out how to get your drone to fly than actually practicing and getting it in the air. About 2 years ago, DJI came out with their FPV unit, and it's been an absolute game changer. And essentially what it is it's goggles, a controller, and then this little tiny receiver that you put inside the drone to connect it all together. So they don't actually make a drone yet. But if you buy a pre-built quad like I recommend, you can pretty much get it set up by only pressing a couple bind buttons, activating everything through their software, and you're pretty much set to fly from there. If you're interested in learning about the exact gear that I fly and recommend, there'll be a video link up here. That will link you to a video where I go over all the current gear that I use and fly. Like I said, you don't have to do DJI, but in my opinion, it's way more important to just spend the time flying and getting good at flying than actually building the drones themselves. And I have just spent so much time trying to figure out how to link and bind things and dealing with issues that, in my opinion, the best move is to just go with DJI. For all these products that I'm talking about, there's going to be links down in the description. And like I said, there is analog ones that work as well. Just check back on my channel and I have a few videos on the TBS Oblivion on there, but if you can afford it, definitely go DJI. Anyways, on to tip number 4. Alright, and tip number 4 is just to keep at it.
Do it! Just do it!
I know, it's frustrating, it's super hard, and there's so many times learning FPV where I just wanted to throw everything out and just quit. It's so frustrating when you spend all this money and time building a quad and then you get it up in the air and then just crash right away. And it doesn't work anymore, and then you're stuck just thinking like, why the hell did I spend all this time fixing it? So when I was first getting into FPV, I bought this drone called an Eachine Wizard. It took me like 3 months to set this thing up. And I'm finally in the air, things are going great. I'm just cruising. I'm like 300 feet in the air, just cruising. I didn't have my goggles, I was just flying line of sight. And then all of a sudden, nothing was happening. And my drone was just plummeting out of the sky, like into my neighbor's house. And it just plummeted out of the sky, and I just couldn't do anything because I ran out of battery. I'm used to the DJI setups where they run like 20 to 30 minutes, but FPV only goes 4 to 5 minutes. So I was 300 feet in the air and just totally ran out of battery. And it was just like, and just disappeared. I thought for sure I would go to my neighbor's house and it would be like sticking in their roof. But luckily it landed in their yard and had just made like this giant crater in the grass. But it was so frustrating that drone in particular, I never even took the time to fix just because I was so frustrated by things. It's really hard, but it's worth it. I can honestly say it's one of my favorite things in the world to do. It's just such a cool way to capture the world around you. So keep at it, you got this.
Just do it! Stop giving up.
The last tip is going over the cameras that you should be shooting on. The simple answer is GoPro. For one, the image quality is top notch, and 2, it's compatible with this software called RealSteady, which is an aftermarket stabilization software, which will turn super shaky footage into like buttery smooth footage. But for some reason, a lot of beginner FPV pilots go straight for the brand new GoPro, and they spend $400 on a GoPro that's definitely gonna get destroyed. Trust me, I have smoked through GoPro after GoPro, after GoPro, after GoPro, and it's not worth spending a bunch of money on something that you're just gonna crash. So my recommendation is starting with the Hero 6. You can pick up Hero 6s for I think like $150 to $200, which is half the price of the new ones. And with the 6s, the image quality is top notch. Like I said, you can use RealSteady with it, and it's just way less risk than buying a brand new one. Even to this day, really high-level, top-level pilots still fly with the Hero 6 because you can shoot 4K 60 and stabilize it with RealSteady. So you can spend that money that you saved on buying the Hero 6 and either fix up your drone, or you could buy a plane ticket to somewhere dope and go fly your FPV somewhere super cool. Anyways, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Again, if you haven't absolutely crushed the like button, I would just really appreciate it. But that's it for this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.